These sorrow-friendly practices are things like going to a counselor or finding a friend to just talk through this stuff with together, keeping a journal if you're kind of shy about doing things like that, or writing little poems or memos to yourself of one sort or another, telling little stories, harvesting stories about this person and your life with him or her.
Welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. I'm your host, Kendra Rinaldi. This is a space to explore the full spectrum of grief, from the kind that comes with death to the kind that shows up in life's many transitions. Through stories and conversations, we remind each other that we're not alone. Your journey matters, and here we're figuring it out together. Let's dive right in to today's episode. Let's start with a quick disclaimer. This podcast includes personal stories and perspectives on topics like grief, health, and mental wellness. The views expressed by guests are their own and may reflect individual experiences that are not meant as medical advice. As the host, I hold space for diverse voices, but that does not mean I endorse every viewpoint shared. Please listen with care and take what resonates with you. Thank you all for joining us today. Today, we have Thomas Attig. He is an applied philosopher and a leading voice in grief studies. His work offers a revolutionary approach focusing on grieving as a relearning how to live in the world. He is the author of How We Grieve and the new collection that he has called Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows. Welcome, Thomas.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks for asking.
I'm glad that you are here. And I know you have a lot of other accolades that we could kind of go into as we start chatting and learning more about your life and how you ended up in this space. You've been given a lot of different honors throughout your lifetime, and I'm very excited to get to learn more about you and your work. So, Thomas, I like to start off usually getting to know a little bit more about my guests. And one of the ways I do that is by asking, where did you grow up and where do you live now? You've shared with me you live in Victoria, Canada, but can you tell us about your upbringing, please?
Yes, I was born and raised in Wheaton, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago about 25 miles west. My mother was one of 9 children. My father was one of 10. My dad was 18 years older than my mother. He was born and raised in Iowa. He was born in 1896. His father was born in 1859. That's my grandfather was born the year before the Civil War began. So really spread out. And my mother was the first child born in the U.S. Her parents came from Germany. They had 4 children while they were there. She was the 5th child and the first one born in the States. Let me tell you just a little bit about how Mom had some influence on me. Given the large families and given lack of ease in traveling and so on, when people started dying in my father's family, lots of cousins and eventually aunts and uncles and so on, letters would come in and inform and explain what happened about how Uncle Ed died or Uncle Arnold died or Aunt Myra died or whatever. And they would go into detail about what happened. And instead of just keeping it between her and my father, she read these letters out loud. So from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, I was very much familiar with details of sometimes terrible ways of dying, and witnessing the sadness in my family. And if anybody got sick, and especially if they were terminally ill and so on, in my mother's family, mom would take me to the hospital, and I would sit through an afternoon or an evening or an all day in a hospital room with someone who's dying and not communicating very well. So it became very familiar. I remember talking to my editor for my first book, and I explained this to her, and she said she had hardly ever heard the word death while she was growing up at all, and no one had died, and she hadn't witnessed anything, and she hadn't heard any details. I think I was just sort of set up to be comfortable with what usually makes people very uncomfortable. I have vivid memories of attending my Aunt Katie, my Uncle Omar's uh, wife. Um, she was my favorite aunt, and she died in central Illinois, and we went to her funeral. And that was my first exposure there. I remember colorful funerals. Um, I had a very colorful Uncle Arnold who could barely stay with anybody more than 4 or 5 weeks, and then he had to move somewhere else. He was in some ways kind of disgusting, in some ways kind of delightful and entertaining. And he told lies. He told big lies. I mean, he made things up about things that he'd accomplished. I think he gave Trump lessons later. I'm not sure. Anyway, um, when he died, we went to his funeral. I was sitting next to my mother, and this minister starts talking about the old Adam and the new Adam and stuff that was just bizarre theology and so on. I tugged at my mother's sleeves. I thought we were here to remember Uncle Arnold. Why isn't she talking about him? Who's this Adam fellow? And so on. And uh, my childhood was full of experiences like that. I cannot say that I was in any way disposed to work in a death and dying area. I could tell you what happened in my schooling that sort of moved me in that direction, if you'd like.
Yes, I would love that. Before I want to touch on what you just said, that your editor was shocked at the fact that you had been exposed so early on to these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if part of it is also generational too, of certain things that were really just part of it was normal at certain times to talk more about these things about death, and then all of a sudden it became more of a taboo, because nowadays it is definitely more taboo to talk about death, and sometimes parents shield their children so much talking about anything, right? And they say they went to sleep. They're not very upfront. Instead
Oh,
of
yeah.
saying they died, right? They used words that are not clear. It creates confusion. So, would you say that generation wise, that also has become even a little bit more of the issue?
It used to be that when people were prepared for burial, um, their bodies were at home. And they call them funeral parlors because prior to their existence, which was about World War I, people came to people's homes to view the person who died, and sometimes even ceremonies were held there, or they were brought from the home to the family church for a ceremony, and so on. And what happened in part in the 20th century, starting about the 20s or so, people bought large houses and established funeral parlors. So there's a big house that could be used by families that have small houses where it's not possible to come and view and so on. And eventually, people who were dying were more and more sequestered in hospitals and so on, where previously more of their dying time was home time as well. So it became very unfamiliar. Just if you have a really small 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom home, you're not going to have crowds coming in to view a person in the family who died. Very nice that this guy down the block has several rooms in this larger home, calls it a funeral parlor, and eventually his business gets so big that they start making buildings that are standalone for funerals, and so on. So I don't think people were necessarily averse to spreading the word or exposing people, but things got moved out of the house, and that made it harder for it to be familiar. Uh, I've known a lot of funeral directors, very interesting people. I have to mention one thing in my family, just the letters come in and so on. I met a cousin. What was his name? There were so many cousins. There were 40 cousins. So um, he worked on a farm. He came to visit us once, and his arm had been partially cut off in a combine accident. And that was shocking, but we spent an evening with him. I got used to the idea that you can be injured seriously and so on. A few years later, he died in a combine accident. He was combined to death. Very few people are exposed to that sort of thing when they're a young child. But here was mom, and she would talk about all of it. If I had any questions, she answered my questions. So that was a setup that my editor gave away. Is quite uncommon.
Yes, yes, no, but it is so necessary, I think, even just nowadays, for us to return more to that, to the real, like the truth of what it is that's happening, and as parents, to be transparent with our kids in a way that is answering the questions that they have, very clearly,
Mhm.
without I mean, not, you don't have to necessarily go so much into every single detail depending on the age of the child,
Yeah.
but it will shift and change the way that they feel themselves about death. We feel that it's going to make them even be more scared of it, but if you just know it's part of life's process, I think it actually makes you less
I,
afraid.
I think from a quite early age, I was very clear that you don't get out of this life alive. All right, that's just part of what it is, and you hope that you have a fairly long life, or at least a good life, even if it's short. Um, I was going to tell you about going off to school. I was very good in school at math. In fact, I had perfect scores on standard tests and so on. So I thought when I went off to college, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. My favorite people were teachers. My older brother was a teacher. I want to teach. I started taking advanced math at the university, and I watched my teachers, and I did not want to be any one of them. They were not impressive. And then I began to think, if you're a teacher, don't you have to teach the same problems every year? Especially, say, if you're teaching in high school. Imagine teaching classes full of trigonometry students, and only 3 or 4 of them care, and you're doing the same problems every year over and is that going to be a stimulating career? And I looked at my brother, and my brother was a history teacher at a very good high school in California. And he was having interesting discussions about all kinds of things. He was drawing out students into deep thinking about wonderful things to think about. And I thought, maybe the humanities. So my second year, I took English and um, philosophy and history. And I said, I'm going to go with what I do well with and like. It has to be both. Okay. And it turned out that philosophy was it. So I got myself trained to do philosophy, and I became interested in something called phenomenology and existentialism. Existentialism is a cluster of philosophers who are seeking wisdom for living a finite life meaningfully. And phenomenologists are people who study ways of describing and interpreting human experience. Put those two together, and you have something that was very interesting for me. I went off to graduate school, and I was studying with one of the leaders in that field, and he said, a lot of people are arguing about whether this kind of philosophy is even possible. Don't be one of those. Be one who does it. And we need more people who describe experiences, because we need to understand experiences better if we're going to live better and more wisely. So that was in my head. My dad died uh, when I was in, I think, the second year of graduate school. And he died of a series of strokes over a period of 5 or 6 years. Had visited him several times. I went back for his funeral. It was about a 300-mile drive. A friend drove with me. That was good. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye to Dad, but the last time I'd been there, we said goodbye to each other, and we knew we weren't going to see each other again. I had that experience, and I was driving back to St. Louis from Chicago, and as I was driving, I felt like I would really like to talk to somebody about this experience. And I kind of went over the roster of my philosophy professors, and with some of them, I was probably unfair because I didn't know them well. But the summary view when I got back was, these people are not people I feel comfortable going in and talking with. I want to be a different kind of philosopher. I want to be someone who, if someone's in a hurting place, they want to come and be with me and tell me their sorrows, and just puzzle together about what's just happened and what it means and how to live in the wake of what's happened. So I had that seminal experience. I went off to teach. I went to a university where they were founding a new College of Health and Human Services with nursing programs, social work, child and family development, gerontology. And I'd been teaching existentialism and phenomenology and ethics for a while. And I thought, in this new college, some of my colleagues are going to teach medical ethics, philosophy of law, environmental ethics, and so on. I could teach a course on death and dying. And I thought it would be ethical issues in death and dying. As I had 6 months or so to get ready to teach the course, it occurred to me that the students I was going to be teaching wouldn't be so much interested in ethical issues. They would come up, but not all that often. They would be afraid to go into a room where someone's dying. They wouldn't know what to say to someone who's grieving. That's not home territory for them. And I thought, I'm going to become an intellectual one-man band. I don't know of any philosophers who are talking about this kind of stuff.
One man, you're the one-man band class.
Yeah, so I've got to read psychology and sociology and maybe some history and some literature, read poetry, whatever, and so on, and put together a course where we've got materials that we can chew on together. And I went on for a number of years, and the demand for the course kept getting bigger, so it got out of control. I had to teach a number of my colleagues how to teach the course. And I got to a point where I had been regularly asking students to respond to exercises. And one of the exercises was, describe your 3 most important loss experiences in your life. And if you haven't lost 3 people, you don't necessarily have to talk about someone's dying. If you have lost them, write those, but just write about losses. And no one mentioned 5 phases or stages
Mm-hmm.
of dying. What they talked,
Of grief, the stages of grief.
yeah, what they talked about was a difficult place in the home. They didn't know how to go into the room, or a conversation with somebody they didn't know how to have, or um, some project that they'd undertaken that didn't seem to make much sense anymore now that mom's died or dad's died or my brother's died or my best friend's died. And I began thinking about what they were telling me, and eventually I wrote an early article on grieving as a process of relearning how to live in the world. And I tried it out on my students, and they all went, "That's it. Not that other stuff, not the stuff we read in the little textbook that you had us looking at and so on. That's what it's all about." My father died. That was hard. One of the hardest things was talking to grandma. She's now a woman who's lost her son. I don't know how to talk to her. And the world is full of things that can be challenging for some people or entirely indifferent for other people. They don't have those experiences at all. But the scope of it became clearer. It's not just little corners of the world. Your whole life is different. Your daily life can't be the same sometimes because somebody lives with you, isn't there anymore. Um, your social life is very complicated. You don't know how to be with someone who's grieving, but grieving in a different way. Um, your physical surroundings can be quite different for you to engage with. Um, Even walking downtown, you maybe had a special way of going downtown. You take that walk now without the person who died. What's it like sitting in church without this person by your side? Um, it became a career for me, for one. I was invited to go back to the place where I did my graduate work, and I decided to make a real essay out of this way of thinking. And I had an old professor who was a colleague of the fellow who taught me phenomenology and existentialism. And I gave his talk, and afterwards, Carl was his name, came up to me and said, "I was a colleague for Herbert for 25 or 30 years. Um, you taught me in that talk more than I learned from those 30 years of talking technically to Herbert and so on." And then it really came home to me. My training in philosophy is what set me up to be able to do what I did and what I have been doing. Now that's background enough, I think.
I love it. No, because all of this is so full of so many nuances and information that you just shared. Because what you talked about your students and really needing what they were needing is what ended up helping you develop what they were searching. So a lot of times we keep on using the same resources, the same material without really exploring what are people really needing in their grief and going in that angle. And in that same way, when we interact with grievers, approaching each one as individuals with their own ways of feeling, and there's not just one way. There's not one size fits all for everyone. So in this book that you've written, this collection of stories, what did you go, because I have not read it yet, did you go into the cultural ways as well of grieving? Can you tell us more about this work of your last book?
It's a collection of um, things starting in the 1980s, actually, when I wrote the Grieving as Relearning the World. And there are 14 pieces that were previously published. And when you publish as an academic smaller pieces or essays, they tend to go in anthologies or journals that very few people have access to. And very few people learn that you have written them. It sort of counts to help you get tenure and promotions and a little bit of reputation among your fellow philosophers and academics, but it doesn't reach outside of those circles very well. So for most readers, the earlier stuff that is in here, even fellow professionals, the stuff is new because they never found it. And then I wrote 9 new things to go with those 14. So, and what it does in part, it's like a intellectual autobiography. How did my thinking develop over the years? I started here, and there are about 4 essays, the one I just mentioned, and one about grief and personal integrity, and one about coping with mortality as a grieving process, and one about the importance of recognizing that grieving is an active process. Those were seminal ideas. I'm recognized for those. Um, there's one guy who's really doing the job, and he's a smart man, and he's all over the place, and he edits journals, and he does various things, and so on. I've spoken with him recently. We met in the 1990s. He just startled me one day as we were conversing. They were visiting here for a while. He called me his teacher. And I thought, you're the guy who took it on the road. And he's developed and refined things, and I've developed and refined things through the years. So what you get in the book is, what's the nature of grieving? You get in the book, what's the nature of studying about and learning about and thinking about and developing ideas about grief and loss. Philosopher, seeker of wisdom, as opposed to scientist, seeker of scientific understandings. It's about what are we as the selves that we are? What enables us to do what has to be done when you're making the kind of adjustment that grieving requires? Are we just egos who solve problems and take control of things and try to manipulate things and so on? There must be something more to us than that. We love one another. We care deeply about things and traditions and cultures. We struggle to become more, become better, contend with suffering and hardship and overcome, to rise above the worst of life and reach for the best of life. We probably have souls and spirits. Let's talk about what they are. And my understanding of those things grew and grew. In the 2000s, I was invited to replace a faculty member and dear friend who had died at another university in Canada, and I taught online for about 10 years. And I was supposed to teach about ethics and spirituality at the end of life. And the spirituality felt strange to me until, as I was doing it, I realized that as I was understanding souls and spirits, that's the spirituality within us that transcends our egos and makes up for the deficiencies of our egos, and so on. So the book contains accounts of my coming to understand better and better who we are and what we're capable of. And then it also contains reflections on, caring for grieving souls and spirits. And it's different from medical care, and it's much more personal and individual. There's an interesting piece there. These days, within all kinds of institutions, especially caregiving institutions, there is insistence on evidence-based practice. And the attempt is to make caregiving more scientific and predictable and so on and so on. And I talk about seeking wisdom as opposed to seeking scientific evidence because wisdom pertains to individual matters. Individual souls and spirits are quite different and unique, and you need to develop understandings of how to listen to a story and pick out the details that matter and support people in dealing with the uniqueness of their experience rather than how they're like everybody else. So, seeking wisdom, it turns out to be what you do when you're a philosopher. If you're going to be thinking about grief and loss, wisdom is the product you want to give to other people or share with other people or talk about with other people. How do I, given who I am, with this kind of experience that's unlike anybody else's experience of its kind, how do I go on? What do I need? How do I think it through? How do we together puzzle about this? And it's not about, this is another thing that's in the book, it's not about solving problems, it's about seeking wisdom. It's about contending with mysteries. Problems can be solved, managed, controlled, ticked off the list because you're finished with it, and so on. Mysteries are constants in your life, like life itself, or love, or the depth of your soul and spirit, or finiteness, or any number of other things. We meet with, we contend with what they're showing us now, and we move on. Later, they show us other faces, and we have to do it again. And they never stop showing us new faces, and we never finish with them. So, if the big aspiration is how do I learn to live meaningfully and with integrity, that's a lifetime project as opposed to a problem solving challenge. All right.
Yeah.
And if grieving is relearning how to live, it doesn't end any more than learning how to live in the first place ends. You never finish with it. So, closure, silly thing to aspire to. You want closure on learning how to live your life? Nah. And forever, there will be moments when I'll do a little bit more learning of what it means not to have my father in my life and what it means to be able to remember my father and still be moved by him in certain ways, or in new life circumstances, to find myself being moved by or appreciating my mother in ways that I didn't so much when she was alive. That's how it works. It's
Yeah.
ongoing. And if you're a wisdom seeker as opposed to a science pursuer, you get yourself wiser about how to pursue wisdom, not necessarily get it, but pursue it.
I love it. I
That's what's
love
in the
so
book.
many things. Yeah, I know you said so many things, and I'm really curious now to read it. So many things that I have some questions about and just some thoughts. But with that of the learning, relearning how to live with grief, I recently did like even just a free event online for people just to talk about this. How do we integrate grief and gratitude into our life in this new version of who we are and living with those two and
Mhm.
knowing that they are just part of who we are now and we're constantly in a flow of grief in our life. There's always something that's ending and something that's beginning. Always, it's a
Yep,
constant cycle, right? So as human beings, because we grieve not only when somebody has died, we grieve when a part of us has died or a time period in our life has ended, right? We
absolutely. Yeah,
right, there's so many different griefs that occur. So learning that that is just part of living, and as you said, living in our life is just beautiful. So I love that you said that.
Hi, I just wanted to take a quick pause and ask that if this episode is speaking to you, I'd love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. just go to my website, Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between, and you will be receiving some of my newsletters. I send every probably couple of weeks. Also, if someone has popped into your mind and you feel that this is something they would resonate with, please send them this episode right now because it may just be what they needed to hear. Now, let's get back to the show.
I have a question regarding your understanding about grief and then the grief or grieving and then mourning. The two words, because I know that for me, I have a definition for each that I apply, but I'm curious as to your perception or understanding of these two words that sometimes we use interchangeably, but that mean different things.
Grieving and mourning, right?
Correct. Yes.
There are places in my writings where I've talked about those. The phenomena are these. There's dying, and our mortality sets us up so we're all going to do that. And when we have died and someone survives us who cares about us, there is bereavement, which is the state of being deprived of their presence. It's a state, and it refers to deprivation. And it goes back to farmland talk and so on, where you bring in the stuff and the field is deprived of its contents. Sometimes people talk about bereavement as if it is grieving. No, grieving is two things. Grieving is reacting to what has happened. Feelings, thoughts, differences in your bodies, different effects on your spirituality and dispositions toward the world and so on come over you. Suffering comes over you. The anguish of being separated comes over you. That's grief reaction. It's like when somebody hits you on the knee and your leg goes boink. That's a reaction. You don't have control over reactions. They just come over you. Grieving response, on the other hand, is what we do deliberately or semi-deliberately, but we take initiatives in on the other side of reactions. We respond to our reactions, and ultimately we're responding to the changes that have happened in your world now that this person isn't here anymore. Traditionally, when people have talked about mourning, they have been referring to traditional practices in response to what has happened. In the literature on grief and loss, it's all over. I'm not really too comfortable in using the word mourning, but if I would be pressed, I would say that mourning is a limited range of a small variety of responses, typically culturally defined responses. This is the way we do it in this village or in this family or in this culture or in this country, and has to do with ritual and ceremony very commonly, or practices like saying the Kaddish every year on the anniversary. That's a ritual. It's a practice. Or in some cultures they don't do this much anymore. But wearing black for a year, that's mourning. That's mourning practice. And I think of grieving response as just far broader than those limited traditionally defined kinds of practices, things to do to mark what's happened or to help you organize around it or to feel comfortable in a framework that you don't feel isolated and alone, you and the others. And before you, all those others have done this, and you feel part of something larger when you think of yourself as mourning, I think.
Thank you for sharing, because it is different how everybody perceives it. Like the way that I see mourning is like the action that we could even choose, whether it's a ritual or even something that is unique to myself as to how I want to move the grief through me,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's through journaling, whether it's through walking. So in the way that I word
Mm-hmm.
mourning for myself and like for my clients is usually like, what are things that are in your control as to how you express your grief? Because a lot of times the grief is just going to occur, right? When we just
Mm-hmm.
cry, just like what you said, it's the reaction. But the mourning, I feel that it's those little parts of the grief that we do have some control over something
Absolutely.
that we have no control. So I like to like empower people as to you have some aspects that you can control and others that you can't. So the ones that you can, gather any tools that can help you with that process of the uncontrollable emotions,
I,
right? Yeah.
what you're doing is perfectly sensible. I'll mention another thing that's
Yeah.
in the book. When I was doing the course uh, online, I wound up starting to write another little book, and I've never written up in the same way that I'll tell you in a little while. Um, I wrote a heart-to-heart book for bereaved people, and in one way, it was tailored. There's nothing longer in the book than a short page. I'll actually show you what it looks like. This is a book that I give to grieving people. It's called Catching
It's
Your Breath in
yeah.
Grief.
Yeah, I was just going to read it out loud since the
Yeah,
people that for the
Catching
people
Your
listening,
Breath in
catching your
Grief,
breath in grief. Uh-huh.
and Grace Shall Lead You Home.
Mm,
Okay.
love the title. Uh-huh.
And inside, it looks like this. Every page has a photograph on it, and a couple of paragraphs. And some of them are attractive, and some of them are quite so attractive. That's attractive. The one on the left is being hopeful. The one on the right is reviving ego, and it just goes like that.
And it has, just so the listeners can hear, it's right now the ones you just showed me are pictures of flowers. One has like purple and
Yeah,
one's like a picture.
it's
And then underneath is the writings.
and I want to link it with what you were just talking about, mourning and these things that you can do. Um, I talk quite a bit in here about what I call sorrow-friendly practices, um, things that you can do to attend to the things that are bubbling up, the reactions that are there. People tend to want to just suppress those, get away from them, maybe medicate to make them stop. Um, let's just talk about them as emotions for a while. Um, I don't think emotions um, want to be expressed. I think they want to be attended to and understood. And sorrow-friendly practices can help you pay attention to this stuff that's crying out in you for, listen to me. Uh, I have in mind your soul's pain, and I've got some ideas of what you need in your soul. I've got in mind your spirit's pain, and I've got some thoughts about what might help your spirit. I understand your ego's pain. It feels like you can't do anything. You have no control over anything. You're useless. You've been stupid. You thought you were Superman, and now you're this whimpering fellow who doesn't know where to go and doesn't know what to do. You stupid little ego, and so on. That's what you're thinking. I'm still here, and I have things in mind for you that you can do if you listen to me. You can still do all of the everyday problem solving. You can still keep a checkbook. You can still do thousands of things that by habit you know how to do them. Don't be afraid, but just don't think you're invulnerable. Nothing bad can happen to you because you're such a good, wonderful person, and so on. Just get over the stupidity of your illusions about yourself and being much larger and more important than you really are. But you are significant, and you know how to live in this world, and you know how to get yourself fed and clothed and slept so you can do the other things that you really care about even more. This is your soul talking. You care deeply about this person who just died. Fortunately, I want to tell you, if you listen to me, you can continue loving after they die, loving them after they die. This is a big bit of news for you. And all those other people who are still alive that you really still care about, but you're so preoccupied with this grief that you're not doing very well attending to them. Maybe what you could do is grab a hold of a book like this and read it as a family. We just had a cousin in our family, my wife's side of the family, die. And we went to a kind of family gathering afterwards. I brought a copy of that book for every immediate survivor, the brothers, sisters, children, and so on. And after we got home, a couple of days after, we got a phone call, and the fellow's brother's family decided that they were going to read this book together and sit and talk about it like a page at a time. I've known families who have done this in uh, palliative care units and hospices. I remember once I was just thrilled. A minister friend of mine was working as a chaplain in a hospice, and she came to me and she said, I walked down the hall today and I heard a lot of conversation in this one room with this dying man. And I just peeked in. They were reading your book to each other. I mean, that's the kind of thing that people can do. Anyway, these sorrow-friendly practices are things like going to a counselor or finding a friend to just talk through this stuff with together, keeping a journal if you're kind of shy about doing things like that, or writing little poems or memos to yourself of one sort or another, telling little stories, harvesting stories about this person and your life with him or her. You can do meditation on your emotions. You can follow various religious practices. You can just kind of retreat into silence and let the silence speak to you. You can do things with prayer. You can do things with ceremony and ritual. You can do things with the arts. You can produce art. You can consume art. You can learn to appreciate arts that you haven't appreciated before. You can take seriously extraordinary experiences, like experiences where you think you heard a voice, or where you think you thought during the night you were spoken to by the person who died. Take seriously those experiences. They're not threatening. They're not out to hurt you. They're reaching out to speak to you. In the new book, I've got about 20 pages on sorrow-friendly practices where I deliberately describe them and tell people how to do things with them that are helpful. Embracing your faith. And I'm not too keen on people subscribing to a list of propositions and saying, yes, they're true. I'm talking about ways of finding that you can trust your life and the world around you, and you can be loyal to what still works, and you can seek it out. You can maintain commitments that are meaningful to you and were possibly meaningful to the person who died, which is part of keeping your love for them alive, and so on. That's a long way of saying that there's quite a bit of substance in mourning. And I take myself as speaking to what you were talking about.
I love it because everything you said, it's not about suppressing. It's really, and I love that you call it, sorrow.
Sorrow
Sorry,
friendly.
yeah, sorrow friendly practices, because it's okay to embrace those moments in which you do want to sit down, like even choosing like a playlist that's gonna make you like I'm gonna actually listen to music that is going to embrace the fact that this is how I feel right now and allow it to
Yeah.
flow, because that is a way of paying attention to that emotion and not ignoring it, like you said. Like it's like they're there like little kids kind of saying, hi mommy, 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 look at me. Right.
Yes. I
So
would like to do something if you would let me do it.
yes,
There's a passage in here.
please read it. This is in the catch this is Catching Your Breath.
Yeah, this is in Catching Your Breath in Grief. And I'd like you to see the visual.
Okay, so this one is, which kind of bird is this one? This is a white,
Oh, this is a huge bird up in the Northwest. I don't know.
it's a huge white bird, and the title is Being Grateful, which is part of my podcast. So yes, please read it.
You might wind up wanting to do something with this thing at some point. I don't know. And I would give you permission. You breathe most deeply into life when you accept heartache as the price of love. You wouldn't hurt so much had you not been given a unique place in the great web of life, a life to live, soul and spirit with which to live it, and the privilege of loving and being loved by the one that you grieve. The pain of missing him or her is an inevitable companion to the joy of his or her sharing life with you. Avoiding love out of fear of sorrow would have cost you all that you miss, and allowing fear to control you as you enter the next chapters of life would cost you all that you still have. When you realize your good fortune in having your loved one in your life, an amazing grace assures you that courage, hope, and joy outweigh fear, despair, and sorrow. You live more fully when you are grateful.
It's beautiful.
The
Thank you
book is like
so
that.
much. So much. It's a beautiful book to even have, because it has so many pictures. You know how people call it coffee books.
Yeah.
It is literally something that could just be out in your home, right out there. And then in those moments in which you're sitting at and like you said, you could be sitting in the living room with your family and just opening and just to one space and see what shows up. So that one was released when? When did you release Catching Your
Oh,
Breath
that
When You're
one, the
Grieving?
first iteration of it was 2012, and it's available at Amazon along with the other book.
With the other one.
I redid it. I didn't change really the substance of it, but some of the formatting of it in 2019. So it's been out there for a
That's-
while.
Thank you. And so again, and that's Catching Your Breath When You're Grieving. And then the most recent one is Seeking Wisdom and Death's Shadows,
Yeah.
Collected Writings on How We Grieve. And that one was released in 2025. Thomas, it's just been such a joy to get to talk to you. And I want to make sure, again, people know that they can get all these books on Amazon, or can they find them also in their local bookstore, or is Amazon the best
The
way?
book, unfortunately, um, the Seeking Wisdom book and the How We Grieve book from long ago, and the Heart of Grief book, all three of them are published by Oxford University Press. And uh, though they are very friendly books, and many more purchase them than academic readers, uh, bookstores aren't accustomed to
To
carrying
carry.
academic books. So Amazon is one. Going directly to Oxford University Press, just online, you'll get there and you'll find it. They've published something like 50,000 books, so they're a
Wow.
big time publisher.
Yes, yes, yeah.
um, either place works. If you go to Amazon, I see they've got them set up so all 4 of the books I just mentioned are to be found in the same place.
Perfect. So we
Um,
just search your name, Thomas Attig, and then
yeah,
all of them would come out. And I'll make sure
and
to link
friendly.
that at
The
the bottom.
books are friendly too, right?
Yes, yes. Thomas, I before we wrap up, I like to make sure to ask the following question. Is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners that I might have not asked you during this interview?
All you can do in an interview like this is a kind of a sampling. Um, I'm not, well, I think you can get a sense that I'm pretty clear when the writing is the same. Something happened to me when I was a graduate student. I was studying with a guy who did this European phenomenology existentialism stuff. He had no colleagues who were doing the same thing. So when he had to put together um, a dissertation committee of 3 or 4 professors who would follow along with my study, read it and understand it. I had to learn to speak in plain English rather than in the technical vocabulary in the area where I was studying, or they wouldn't have understood my thing and they wouldn't have approved my dissertation. So I actually wrote a dissertation. It's 320 pages long. I invite no one to read it. Okay. But there was, in the phenomenology part of it, I was explaining phenomenology. And there was a singular example that I wrote about all the way through the book. And it was on the phenomenology of seeing a tree in the yard that should be cut down. I mean, it was that plain, and I explained it all with that example. And there was no one who didn't understand what I was talking about, and the technical vocabulary got itself explained. And in my history of teaching and mingling with professionals in far broader fields than philosophy, palliative care physicians and psychologists and sociologists and anthropologists and so on. My voice is known, 1, as the voice of a wisdom seeker, and 2, as an incredibly clear voice.
Yes. And I do want to say that because it is true in philosophy. A lot of times we can go into all these things that then it's hard to grasp. But everything that you've said in this conversation is easy to digest. And if that same way as your books, then it's just very
That's what it is.
relatable.
Yeah.
Relatable.
This doing podcasts that I'm doing, I'm sure is reaching the kind of audience I want to reach. Someone who's interested in a podcast like your podcast should be interested in the book that I've written. And if this can help us get these people together with those things, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you. I love being able to talk about these topics and with someone that knows so much as you have learned through all these years and that you keep on teaching and sharing. I am just grateful to have had you in my podcast and get to learn from you. So thank you again, Thomas. Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.